Good morning. I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Renner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for the next 17 minutes for your IT show. No, we're not talking information technology. We're talking your Invisible Toolbox, the show that examines the tools essential for working effectively with others.
Now, when we were first recording this, I was welcoming you to a live stream. We had a few technological difficulties. So coming to you now is going to be a pre-recorded version of this show.
Today we're going to, amongst other things, discuss aging millennials.
What? Aging millennials. Millennials are that group with birth years from the early 1980s through about the mid-1990s. There's estimates even as late as year 2000 for birth years. How can we call this population aging?
Well, there are millennials on the front end of that birth age and some on the tail end, and they have different influences that affect them, and so we're going to take a look at that.
Well, and that makes sense. And that also means that their frame of reference could be slightly different even though they belong to the same generation.
Absolutely. Those lines of demarcation are kind of fluid. They're not static.
Exactly.
Well, today we're in our book, Your Invisible Toolbox. We're actually in the chapter called Mind the Gap. That's the chapter that discusses this topic that we're going to be exploring. And you can follow along. It's chapter 98.
So what is the gap that we need to mind when we're working cross-generationally? Well, today we're going to take a look at that gap, and our development challenge is going to equip each of us with some tools to challenge our own value systems.
And our invisible tool of the week is going to be one that'll help us to work cross-generationally. And we're thrilled to be able to welcome to our interview segment Rachel Trainham, who is a summer intern with us at Tero, and we're thrilled to talk to her. She's actually a millennial.
She is a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so let's get started.
Well, one of the largest concerns we had when we were writing this book was that we were putting into it a lot of the facts and things that are out there about millennials, and we were worried people would really not understand our motive for doing that.
Exactly. And we did target the book around millennials because that is the largest cohort that's entering the workplace. But it's also a group that's had a lot of labels attached to them, and it's a little too soon to know whether those labels are accurate or not.
It is, and at Tero we pride ourselves in providing relevant research, but we're very cautious when it comes to generational studies of recent generations. There hasn't been enough longitudinal data for us to be able to make a definitive generalization, and so that's a bit of a caution.
It was a caution, and it was a challenge we figured out early when we were writing this book. You can go out and Google the word millennial along with any other term, and you're going to get a whole bunch of hits. So, for example, if you go out and Google millennial and cupcakes, here's a couple of the examples of articles that come up. What millennials and cupcakes have in common, and how to attract millennial drinkers.
It's so funny. Out there's a lot of data, but there's a lot of opinions out there. And so our motive was not to peg millennials in terms of what they are. Our motive was to bring all of that out there and open up the toolbox of the tools that millennials and actually everyone can use to be able to maximize those perceptions that are positive and mitigate the ones that might create a negative bias.
Absolutely. And the surprise in all of this is that not only are these tools really useful for millennials, they're just terrific for all of us in every situation.
They are. And one sure thing about the research and the research on millennials is we do know that they don't all share the same frame of reference, even if they're in the same generation. And that's true of all generations. Frame of reference is going to differ based on where you are on that continuum of timeline.
That's true, and it's true within a generation. It's also true across generations. And if you think about a boomer manager and the frame of reference difference when working across generations.
So let's take a look at our invisible tool of the week. It's going to help us mind the gap.
So it is time to present your invisible tool of the week, and our invisible tool we're looking at this week is to discover your frame of reference.
Blogger Julie Sprankles did some research, some anecdotal research with regards to how different millennials might have different frames of references. And so she did this by really polling millennials, and she polled them to see which of these two things, and I'm going to give you 3 sets of these things, you most resonated to. So she had Carrie Bradshaw or Kim Kardashian, a prom date or a prom proposal, and an early dial-up or Snapchat.
And which one you connected most with kind of depended on your birth year within the millennials. So our aging millennials, the ones that were born in the earlier part of that time frame, identified more with the first one in the pairs that Deb just presented, even though we ascribe all of those to the millennial generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this tells us a frame of reference is really a strong influence when it comes to what we're going to expect and our preferences. And it's going to differ within those in any particular generation.
Yeah, and you can imagine how this is going to differ across generations. We define frame of reference as the shared understandings, the values, the beliefs, the knowledge across a group with a common experience. And if the beliefs differ, that makes it ripe for some misunderstandings. So how do we minimize those risks?
And we need to minimize those risks. We can do that by really finding out about our frame of reference by just examining our habits and our beliefs. Another thing that we can use is to inquire, use inquiry. If we see something that's a behavior we don't understand or an action we don't understand, to just ask about it so we can start to gain some understanding.
So by using this week's tool of Discover Your Frame of Reference, we can really kind of get rid of some of the confusion and minimize the misunderstandings that happen. And this is not just across generations. These tools actually help us in every situation.
They do. So let's take a look at our development challenge that is also going to help us mind the gap.
So this is the segment of the program we call Your Development Challenge, and this is where we challenge you to challenge yourself, challenge your habits, and try something new. Today, we're going to introduce a couple of techniques to mind the gap when there are generational differences.
So one of the easiest things to do when we encounter difference is to judge it. And usually if we judge it, that judgment is going to be negative because it's going to be based on our frame of reference.
And it is human nature to rush a little bit to judgment. Deb, would you share an example of what that looks like when it comes to generational differences?
I will. One that we hear a lot about would be people from a generation, say the boomer generation, where work was between 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 and in one location. And we have more recent generations where they don't look at work quite that way. It's more flexible. They're doing the work. It's just that it might not be in one location and it might not be within that designated time frame. So if I'm a boomer and I might observe that someone coming in late, in my mind, late, I might misinterpret what's really going on.
Yes, and form a judgment.
Yes.
So how do we prevent ourselves from rushing to judgment or evaluating too quickly?
Well, we can take a couple steps, and to not judge, the first step would be to just re-examine our values.
And does that mean that we have to change our values? It really doesn't. It just means we need to take a look at them. What is the value I hold? What's the belief system that might be leading to this uncomfortable feeling, and maybe attack that before we rush to judgment on another person?
And the second thing we can do is to really take a look at our assumptions. We can assume things and presume things based on our frame of reference, and both of those are going to get us into trouble if someone doesn't have the same frame of reference.
And we see a great example of that here at our work at Tero when an individual is extended an invitation to come to a training workshop. So think about how members of different generations might accept that invitation. When a boomer is invited to attend training, sometimes their frame of reference is this punitive?
Yeah.
You know, why am I being sent to training? And yet someone from a millennial generation may regard that same invitation and welcome it as an opportunity to develop. Same message, same invitation, received completely differently.
Yes. Well, now it's time to take a look at our top Tero social media posts of the week, and we're going to highlight two of them. We actually post every day. Those of you that follow us know this, relevant content around interpersonal skills. So let's look at our top post this week.
And our first post that's blasting on all Tero social media platforms today is from Inc. magazine. It's an article called Why Millennials Matter More in 2017. And the author, Ryan Jenkins, really promotes it isn't that much about the millennials themselves. It's kind of the context and the things that are going on that makes this generation so important.
And our second post is a U.S. News article about feedback. It's been said millennials like to have and desire feedback at work. And this article is by Robin Rushwan, and it's on 4 ways to give great feedback. Actually, everybody deserves to get and give great feedback. You can check this out on all Tero social media platforms on Thursday.
And now we're moving to the segment of our program that we call This Week's Interview. And we are so delighted to welcome Rachel Trainum to the table. And Rachel is a summer intern here at Tero. Also a millennium, and is going to share some of her experience. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we start our discussion, would you tell our viewers a little about your background?
Yes. I recently graduated from Iowa State University with a degree in journalism and mass communications through the Greenlee School with a minor in speech communication.
We're so thrilled to have you here with us this summer at Tero. Now, the millennial generation is said to be the generation that has had the most screen time. What do you think the effects are of that screen time?
I think, having a phone in your pocket at any time of the day or walking over to your desk and your computer being there, it's just you have so much access and accessibility to whatever you want at your fingertips, whoever you want. You can call anybody. You can use it as a form of distraction or ignore someone if you choose to. So it's interesting to see how, because I got my phone when I was in 5th grade, so what I remember, what I learned then and kept as a memory from what I learn now and don't remember as well, because I'm like, oh, I can just Google it if I need to. So it's strange.
That's so interesting. Retention, we used to have to remember and memorize a lot of things, and now it's more you can access the information rather than have it in memory.
And we seem troubled sometimes that maybe it's going to change the way we think or dumb us down. When you mentioned you were in 5th grade when you got your phone, I was in grade 5 when they first allowed calculators into the classroom. And I remember some of those same concerns. Oh no, people aren't going to be able to think anymore. And now we've got these great advances in technology.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, you've been involved a lot with the book, Your Invisible Toolbox, and we were worried when we were writing it because we wanted to put all the data and all the opinions out there. We don't say they're right or they're wrong, and we don't know, but we wanted to put them in there along with the tools that would help millennials. What's your take on how a millennial would read that book and would be able to really take a look at it in that way?
Well, with everything that is in the news or in the papers or online about millennials, the first thing, if you read it, you see millennial, and it's almost like an eye roll. It seems. It's just like, okay, what now?
What are they saying about us now?
And so you just kind of have to move past that. I lent the book to one of my friends, and I told her, I was like, she's working 3 jobs, so she's very overwhelmed, and I thought she might enjoy the book, and I just told her, ignore the title, just get past it, open the page, and go to the table of contents and look at the chapters and see what stands out to her most. I told her, don't read it front to back, just kind of pick and choose. It's a really nice book that you can kind of scatter yourself throughout it and find whatever section is important to you at the time in your work life. So it's interesting.
That's a great way.
She likes the Lady Gaga chapter.
The Lady Gaga chapter.
That's a great suggestion on how to digest the book. Well, from your perspective, millennials, we know we don't have things that we think are necessarily completely definitive, but you've probably seen different things that you think this generation probably does exhibit. What would some of those be?
Some of those would just, honestly, coming into it, the generation before us, they're always learning, and we're wanting to just move ourselves into there. So sometimes I don't think all millennials will take a step back and listen to what the generation before us has experienced or learned. And we're just trying to make our way into the workforce and say, let us be there. We don't want to hear from you because millennials are all knowing, And it's interesting to see how the generation before us is trying to keep up. And you've mentioned before the concept of a perennial and how they're constantly evolving and learning. And us millennials are just kind of pushing our way through and working full force. And it's interesting to see, not all millennials are completely opposed to learning and from the generation before us, but sometimes they think, oh, you don't know, you don't understand us, but it's almost opposite of that. So it's kind of interesting to see how the communication between the two generations are evolving and happening.
Well, it's a little easier from the older generation to have the time to look back and want to know about the millennials, and the millennials are trying to make it. They're just getting started.
Getting started in their careers.
Yeah. Have you noticed there's been a lot of talk around just being able to contribute to the world. Can you talk to that? That seems to be a characteristic, and how that looks.
Yeah, to me it seems millennials are really involving themselves in what they believe is true to their character and their beliefs and values, rather than parents or grandparents who are involved in organizations. They're not following that necessarily. They're choosing. We have, like we were talking about screens, we have so much coming at us from all different parts of the world. You know, if you want to be involved in nature conservancy, conservancy,
Conservancy,
or donating your time or charity work, you know, it's interesting to see millennials pick and choose what they want to do. And I think that even kids at a younger age are starting to form those opinions rather than automatically just following what their parents do.
They have more of a global reach rather than just belonging to whatever the association is, a local chapter. Well, you've been involved in some really exciting projects at Tero. Would you share with our viewers some of the things that you've been doing?
Absolutely. I've been mainly working a lot on the book trailer that is to come. You know, not all millennials are technologically inclined. We all struggle there too. So it is coming together. I've also been doing different social media updates, so whether it's LinkedIn or creating the Instagram account for the book, and doing other things online for that, and updating the tools that Tero uses here, just so we can keep evolving here and growing, and you don't want to stay in one place. So, yeah.
And I hear you're taking a class tomorrow.
Yes, I am. I'm taking the impact class, and I've taken change as well, which was really exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Rachel.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. If you missed any segment of the program or you want to share it with others, you'll find the entire program loaded up to Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we're going to look at something that we all do every day, dining. But we're going to do it through the lens of cross-cultural dining, and you might find out that you don't know as much as you thought you knew about it.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your feedback and suggestions for future shows. Whatever team interactions you'd like to know about or leadership situations you're in, email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisibletooolbox.com. And find us out there on your favorite social media platform, and check out Instagram. You'll see Rachel's work out there. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you follow the link below and subscribe, you'll be alerted to when future shows are going to air. And a thank you to Kyle Plummer, our cameraman and director.
And a thanks again to Rachel for joining us as our guest. Thank you to all of you, and that's a wrap.